Okay. Hello, everybody. Good day to you. Good evening to those from India. Good morning to those from the United States. And in between, all of you, good day, good afternoon, wherever you are. So as you are posting on the chat box, please choose all panelists and attendees. I still see that some of you are just addressing all panelists. You won't be able to, you are not visible then to the other attendees. And if you ask questions, if you put any there as a comment, people will not have the context of what you're talking about. So just go for a minute to the bottom where you are typing the message, make sure that comes as all panelists and attendees. If you have any questions that have not been answered, please do post them in the forum. Later, Magda would send you the link for the forum. It's just forum at forum.coacharya. And also at the end of the session in the next couple of days, the video recording of this will be available. So you can go through the entire content of this through the video as well. So today we have a subject which many people had asked me from a corporate standpoint, from a corporate executive coaching standpoint, to try and address, which is about mergers, acquisitions, and whatever are the cultural nuances, the impact, and what needs to be done, and what can be done through coaching. We have today Alex. She's a partner with Bain, one of the largest strategy consulting companies in the world, along with McKinsey. Her specialty is mergers and acquisitions. She has gone through several mergers and acquisitions. In fact, she has co-authored papers on why mergers fail, and corollary to that is what can be done to make mergers successful. While a lot of it may be seemingly technical, what we have requested her to do today is to focus specifically on the human side of it, the cultural side of it. And partnering her in the panel are two people who both are coaches. Anita is associate trainer with Coacharya. She's an MCC coach, and she handles training in a very large part of India, the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. Anita has had corporate experience. She has worked in several companies before. Even now, she does other work with companies. She's an executive coach and a coach trainer. Mohan worked with Anita in terms of his coach training. He's an executive. I don't know whether he's still an executive. He can introduce himself later. He worked in a number of companies, as I know, and both of them have direct experiences of mergers and acquisitions, as well as indirect in terms of knowledge gleaned from such experiences. So what I would leave you now is initially with Alex for her to introduce herself, and then Anita and Mohan. Mohan, I think he's had a problem with the internet. He will come back. They will introduce themselves, and we will get into the presentation more. Over to you, Alex.
Great, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Good evening, depending on where you are around the world. As Ram said, I'm Alex Ramanathan. I partner at Bain & Company. I've been with Bain for about 14 years now, and I focus primarily on merger and acquisitions. So the types of deals that I've been involved with are anything from large global mergers across two very big companies to smaller private equity owned deals that are within the US. So I've seen quite a range of different types of deals and integrations. And one thing that we always focus on as part of our work is the cultures of the two companies that are coming together, and how that influences the success and the experience of the merger. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to start off talking more broadly about culture and how we think about culture within an organization. And then I'll get into specifics around the M&A setting and some of the risks and how we address those. Then I'm going to open it up to our panel. Thank you very much, Anita and Mohan. So why don't I give them a quick opportunity to introduce themselves now, and then we'll circle back after I finish the presentation. So Anita, do you want to start with a brief introduction for everyone? I think you're on mute, Anita.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So saying that Ram did more than enough justice to my experience, so I don't think I want to talk more about it. But definitely want to say that had I been a coach earlier, as I went through certain M&As, etc., in my life, I think I'd been better prepared to handle the change, not just myself, but also for my teams and the organization itself. But I guess more about it when we talk. But really happy to be on this panel today.
Thank you. Mohan, would you like to give a brief introduction here?
Sure. Thanks, Anita. So my own presence in this panel is more from a point of view of someone who has tried to assimilate himself into cultures as they move across, or new cultures as they move across organizations, as they move from one organization to the other. I've worked in about 5 or 6 organizations over the period of the last 20 years or so. And in each of these, at this stage, the thought gets triggered in me is, how could coaching have helped me cope with some of the challenges as I move into a particular organization? So that's so in a sense, I'm hoping to mirror some of the questions the audience itself may have and seek answers from the expertise represented by both Anita, Ram, and you, Alex. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, please feel free as we go along to type questions if you have any. I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation now. Ram, you're able to see it okay? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let me start off with just what is culture? It feels like a basic question, but actually, if you ask a lot of people, it's not that easy to define. And so the way that we think about culture at Bain is really as the collective behaviors of an organization. So people will use words to describe culture like collaborative or data driven. Or high performance culture, but what that really means, what it really boils down to, is a description of the way that people behave. In a collaborative culture, people will seek input. Decisions will be made in committees. People will team. So those are the behaviors that I think are more helpful when we think about culture and describing culture than the actual words themselves. And so we think about it as individual behaviors essentially multiplied by the number of employees. The larger organization you have, the more that those individual behaviors actually might be different. And I've found when you think about culture of very large organizations, something like United Airlines, there's really not one culture. Actually, as you think about different parts of the business, different areas, there can be multiple cultures depending on the individual behaviors within that business unit. So this is a helpful, I think, defining construct as we move forward and focus on sort of the behaviors of individuals and how those reflect the culture of the organization. And the way that we kind of organize this or categorize this, so what does that mean? How do you kind of, where do those behaviors come from? How are they shaped and driven? We think about two different sides of this: the internal compass, which is on the left-hand side here, and then the culture enablers on the right-hand side. And I'm going to talk through each of these in a little bit more detail, but let me give you a bit of an overview. On the left-hand side, we talk about the internal compass of the organization. And what we really mean is the moral compass. What is the purpose of the organization? What is their mission? Why do they exist? And then the values. What are the descriptive words that are used when people think about the organization? What do they post on their website as their values? How do they live? So that's the left-hand side, which that all drives individual behaviors within the organization. On the right-hand side are what we would consider enablers. So these are the more structural things that get put in place to actually drive behavior. So the way an organization is designed and how they work will drive behavior. Think about something like a highly matrixed organization will require some level of collaboration. An organization, when we talk about ways of working that has lots of committees, again, will drive a more collaborative culture. And so the right-hand side are really the more structural things that are put in place, the organizational design, the leadership and role modeling, the talent and performance management, how people are bonused, how people are compensated, clearly drives behavior, which then feeds into the culture. And then communication and routines and workspace, how you work together, even the physical space will very much drive the culture. So let me spend a minute on each of these things, and then I'll go through some examples. When we think about this internal compass, what we're really talking about is what's guiding decisions and actions. Think about the purpose, that ambition or statement of intent, right? What is the reason that company exists? And I'll go through some examples. And the purpose should be very, very aligned to the strategy of the company. Ideally, those two things are working in tandem. Sometimes, though, what happens in corporations that I've seen is the purpose just becomes a statement. It's not really the way that the company or the employees live. It doesn't really drive behaviors. And when the purpose gets disconnected from the behaviors of the employees, that's where you find a culture disconnect. And that's where you find often issues in the way the company's performing, in the way that they're making decisions, a lot of discontent. Because the employees aren't aligned around that purpose. They're not aligned around that reason for being. The values, as we think about the values, those are really the attributes, that are the hallmarks of winning organizations. So these are sort of the words that encompass, how do we live? What are our values? What do we live by? And again, if you, at very strong organizations who really believe in their purpose and values, you will hear employees talk about the values. And even in meetings and things like that, they will compare their actions or their decisions that they're making to the values and whether they live up to the values. And so as you think about this internal compass, it's very important. And it's something that when we do the integrations, and I'll talk about the M&A aspect of this in a little bit, this is something that we really look at as a starting point to say, what are the two companies' reason for being, and how well connected are those? How similar are they, or how different? And you look at the purpose and the values, but you actually try and disaggregate that and think about how is it driving behavior? Because honestly, even similar values can drive different behavior depending on the corporation and some of the enablers that they've put in place. Let me hit on the enablers. So I talked about these four main cultural enablers. And starting at the top, it's really about the org design and the ways of working. And so I mentioned this a little bit already, but the structure and the role assignment will really drive behavior. How the company is organized, what responsibilities people have, where do decision rights sit, does everything need to go through the top executives and the decision rights all sit up there? Or are decision rights pushed down within the organization so that people have autonomy and the ability to kind of make decisions at a lower level? That sort of design and role assignment has a huge influence on the culture of the organization. The formal and informal interactions, what we would call ways of working, again, also highly influence the behaviors of people. Do decisions get made quickly, or do you sit around and debate and discuss? Do people like to have a lot of data at hand, or do people more go by their gut? So these kinds of things very much influence the culture. On inspirational leadership and role modeling, the idea here is how do the leaders show up, right? How do they inspire their employees? What motivates employees? How does the leadership live the culture? So again, I talked about situations where purpose and values just become one of those things that you sort of laminate and put on your wall and don't actually believe in. What happens there is that usually the leadership and the actions that they're taking are inconsistent with the values. And so, where it works and where the culture is strong, when I say the culture is strong, what I actually mean is that the purpose and the values are aligned to the true behaviors you're seeing within the organization. And so the way that people role model, the way that people lead has a huge influence on whether the employees truly believe in the values and think that they're real and truly guide the company, or whether it's just something that you put up on your wall or put up on the website. The other thing I hit on was talent and performance management. So how you recruit talent, how you train, the leadership and development has a huge influence on how you behave. Compensation, obviously, one of the most important drivers of how people behave. It just is what it is. That and career progression, how and when people get promoted, who gets promoted, what they've accomplished, has a huge influence on the culture of the company. It incents behaviors, it influences behaviors, and those behaviors need to be consistent with the values and the purpose of the company. And then finally, communication, routines, and workspace, all of these things. Communication is one of the most interesting that I've seen, especially in an M&A setting, as you think about the way that companies communicate, how much they communicate, how often, in what format, town halls or emails, or do they cascade through their employees? Those things can be very, very different across different companies. And typically the communication should be aligned with the values. Is one of the values transparency? A lot of companies will have transparency as one of their values or one of their guiding principles for their employees, which means they are going to communicate a lot, quite frequently. They're going to want to tell employees as much as possible. A lot of other companies do not have that and do not want to do that for many reasons. And so starting to think about those things and how they influence the culture of the organization is really important in general, but also as you think about an integration setting. Let me pause there for a second. Ram, any questions up to this point?
No, up to this point, there aren't any questions, no.
Okay, great. Well, please feel free to jump in. So as we think about a winning culture, I wanted to walk through a few examples. And if we think about two sort of extremes here, on the one end, we can think about a performance culture. So this would be a culture where the behaviors really help to achieve strategic goals. Accountability, empowering people to act, sort of improves decision making. And the behaviors are aligned with sort of the operating model of the overall structure of the organization and fit within the industry context. So the culture here is really driven by performance, succeeding, achieving goals. On the other hand, you could have a culture that's all about inspiration. People love their company and their specific role. This kind of culture unlocks energy and channels to fulfill the company's mission. And so I thought it might be instructive to just talk through how culture can manifest itself in different ways, both very strong cultures, both very successful organizations, but getting there in different ways in terms of performance or inspiration. And so one example that I wanted to talk through was AB InBev. If you know AB InBev, they're a huge, started out as beer and spirits company, have grown extensively over the years through acquisitions. And their strategy is really focused on reducing costs. And so they want to spend their money investing in its brands to grow. And so to do that and to fuel the investment, they are extremely disciplined about cost management. Extremely disciplined. Their CEO flies in coach. Their offices are small. Doesn't matter what seniority you are. There's all these things that they do to control costs, and it really is a main sort of feature of their culture. So again, strategy being connected to the culture here. So their culture is focused on those value elements like costs, ownership. They have a very strong meritocracy. And so if you think about their key values, one is cost control. So that every dollar spent must be justified. And the employees live and breathe this every day. They really feel passionately about controlling costs. But to do that, they have very strong ownership. So they have rapid decision making, they use agile, and they really infuse that into their behaviors to have a strong ownership culture. And finally, it's a meritocracy. So the way that people get promoted there is by performance and by delivering. So they have lots of stories of 29-year-old CFOs of huge business units. It's not about tenure. It's not about how many different roles you've had. It's all driven by performance and how you behave, how you live the culture, what your outcomes are. And so this is a very, very what we would call performance-based culture. It's really driven by outcomes, success, and living those behaviors. So that's one example. A very different example is Zappos, which probably many of you hopefully are familiar with. But Zappos has built a very inspiring organization truly by embedding a culture of happiness. So Zappos is all about inspiring their employees. They really want their employees to be genuine, to explore their passions, to express creativity, to take ownership. Zappos has legendary stories about their folks at their customer call center who are dealing with customers spending hours on the phone with their customers. They're not worried about call times. They're not worried about success rate and converting deliveries. It's all about the customers, how they feel, and for their employees, it's all about that level of happiness. Continue to develop. They really infuse that in the whole culture of the company, and it's really lived, frankly, by the CEO. And so you see on the right-hand side here his commitment to happiness and how he's infused that in the organization. And they really talk about, as in other articles, he's talked about, they don't talk about work-life balance, they talk about work-life integration. And so he really views it, and they view it as job not being separate from life. Work and life are not two different things, they're infused. And so being happy in your job and being happy in kind of your purpose allows the employees to make customers happier. And so they really see that flywheel of happy employees create happy customers, create happy outcomes for the company and the investors. So very, very different approach in terms of the culture, but again, aligned to their strategy and lived out through the behaviors.
Alex, there are two questions which have come up, which you might like to address now or later. One is from Furry, who's asked about, do companies really look at the cultural alignment process in terms of values, purpose, etc., before they go into the M&A decisions, or is it something that they work backwards? And then I would like to expand it a bit. I don't know of any company which employs psychologists or surveys to first check what really is a driving culture of a company and so on and so forth. Maybe they do. I just would like you to answer the expand. And the second question, I'll come back if you forget that,
Okay.
is Meenakshi has asked, the contrast in culture between AB InBev and Zappos, how does it influence gender norms in these companies?
Good question. So, yeah. So, to address the first question, I do think that companies think about culture. It may, before they decide to combine. It may not be the driving rationale for the deal, certainly, but I do think they think about it. The problem that I've found is that they might look at the purpose and the value statements, and they might say, "Hey, we're pretty similar," or the people who tend to know about a merger before it's announced is a very, very small group of people. And so those people might have had interactions and they say, yeah, our cultures are pretty similar. It's very easy to think on the surface level that cultures are similar. But when you get into it, when you actually understand the behaviors and how they do things and how the employees, what are the behaviors they take, how do they live those values, what I find is that there are more differences than you might think. And so as an example, I was working with two accounting firms who were thinking about merging. And the CEOs had known each other a long time. They had worked together on things. They weren't truly competitors. They were in different regions. And so this was thinking about a combination. And the first thing they said to us was, we have really similar cultures. We really, we think it's going to be a good culture fit. But as we got into it and as we did things like a culture diagnostic and all that, what we found was that one of the companies was really more a performance-driven company. The company was split up into regions. Each head of that region had accountability for the P&L in that region. They were sort of like mini CEOs within the company, and so it was very, very kind of siloed in that way. Whereas the other company really had more of a one firm, mentality, and a one firm culture where they weren't organized by regions. They were actually organized in terms of industries and business lines. And it was interesting as things evolved. The company that was more about one firm started to have this impression of the other company that they were kind of a command and control, and things were centralized, and it ended up being quite negative. And so it's just to answer your question, I think people do think about it, but early on in the M&A process, they give it maybe a cursory thought, or they really think that they have a tendency to think that their cultures are more aligned than they really are once you get into it.
I have a follow-through question on this, because I know you co-authored a paper, and I read that paper from Bain. Most companies, unless things have changed dramatically, when they plan an M&A, they say this, okay, when we come together, like HP did when they acquired Compaq, or Compaq did when it acquired Digital, and so on and so forth. I was a close observer of that process. A plus B will become this. However, the cost of C plus D would reduce because I can eliminate so many things. And unfortunately, neither expectations quite come out. A plus B doesn't remain as A plus B because there is cannibalization, and the C plus D pretty often doesn't come down to the level that they expect. And I think you wrote a paper on that. So how much of it is also due to culture?
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is, so you again, these deals happen very quickly with a very small group of people, and they get together and they say, okay, we're able to, achieve these synergies. And then once you get into it, what can happen, the way culture influences that is either that group who originally set out that goal doesn't realize that by cutting costs in this area, you're going to greatly influence the culture of the company. Maybe that's an area that is really sort of the heart of the company, and by cutting there, you're you're going to reduce employee morale and impact the performance, therefore, of the company. But even more so, I think the thing that I usually find is that CEOs tend to not pay enough attention to culture. There's a different paper that we wrote where we said CEOs need to treat culture like a $200 million synergy. You have to put as much emphasis on how you're thinking about combining the cultures as you are on, capturing the value of the deal. Because if you don't think about the culture of the new company, you don't put as much attention on it, what will happen is that there can be huge culture clashes, and the just even forget about achieving the synergies, just the base business of the company will not be what you expected and will not perform. Does that help, Ram, or answer?
The other one was about the gender part, and also a couple of other questions that have come up. Prem, who headed during my time the management development in Unilever in India, he wants to know how many times have HR heads have been involved as part of the decision making before they decide on M&A. And also another question, how does Bain measure and calibrate culture before looking for alignment?
Yeah, great. Okay, so gender norms. So on that question, it's a good question. I personally have not worked with Zappos and AB InBev. So I don't have firsthand knowledge of sort of what it's like inside the company, whether you're male or female. But I think on the surface level, you can imagine a world where some people might expect that a performance culture like AB InBev would be more aligned to sort of a typical kind of male, way that males sort of succeed, versus Zappos, where people might align that more to the way that females succeed. I don't think that's the right way to necessarily think about it. I think women and men can be successful in both models here. But it could have an influence depending on, who you're trying to kind of recruit and how aligned they are to that culture. I will say that in AB InBev, they truly do believe in the meritocracy. So it for them, it really is about performance and outcomes and delivery, whether you're male, female, or whatever. That is kind of their goal. So that's, I don't have much more than that, as I haven't worked with them personally, but maybe a few thoughts on that topic. On the question about HR, I would find that 9 times out of 10, HR has not been involved in the decision. I think it's a miss, because I do think that having that perspective on culture, on employees, on impact ahead of time is very important. But in my experience, HR has rarely been involved in the actual decision to merge. Now, obviously, they play a very, very big role post that decision, and in leading the company through the new organization and new talent and the culture of the new company. But their role typically comes after the decision has been made, not before. And then Ram, remind me, there was a question about Bain and how we.
How do you measure culture before an M&A in terms of the alignment?
So it's hard to measure it before a decision has been made, because these are usually very, very secret, closely, tightly held negotiations. But one of the things that we do have that we use in our work once we come on after the deal has been announced is a culture diagnostic. So we have a tool that we use, and we'll say it's a survey that we'll send out to the employees of each organization, and it tries to get under this idea of behavior, how decisions are made, how people are incented, how well the company is living the culture that they say they have, where accountability lies. Is it pushed down in the organization? Is it higher? So what we'll do is send that culture diagnostic out, analyze the results and compare. And we actually ask employees not only what their current culture is, but what they hope for the future culture. And one of the interesting things we find is sometimes the two cultures of the companies can be misaligned, and we'll highlight that. Often in certain areas, the companies might be misaligned, but when you ask the employees where they want to be in the future, they're very aligned, which is helpful for the companies to think about, okay, as you know, based on the company we want to be or want to become, we have an employee base that has a shared vision for that on certain dimensions. So that's one of the main tools that we use as we start our integration work.
Yeah, there are some other questions, Alex, but please go on. One of the things I just want to let the audience know is NPS, which is used now pretty much universally in terms of customer satisfaction and so on, is actually a Bain invention. So maybe that also has some effect in terms of measuring culture.
Yes. Well, what we use that for is typically ongoing. So NPS is used, as Ram said, it's Net Promoter Score. It's used for an external survey about your customers. However, we have something that is called eNPS, which is really employee NPS, that is pretty much the same question, but can be used internally as you think about your employee base. And so at Bain, we actually do an annual survey of our own employees, and we ask, how likely are you to recommend working at Bain to a friend? And we ask it at the overall Bain level, and we ask it at the specific office level. So it's a way of measuring satisfaction, certainly. And then there's, you know, a lot of companies do satisfaction surveys to get underneath even more specifically things and drivers. But yes, ROM can also be used internally for employees as well as customers. So let me hit on just a few points as I wanted to talk about culture overall and how we think about culture. Let me move into the M&A specific area and just talk a little bit about how we think about culture integration in the M&A setting. So the main message here is that proactive culture integration is a fundamental driver of short and long-term integration success. And we'll have a discussion in the panel about, you know, where the culture integration has gone wrong and how that has influenced the success of the merger. It's something that we talk to our clients about all the time because, as I said, it can be considered pre-decision to merge, but it's usually not a huge driver. And then it can be an area where companies think they're more aligned than they really are. And so as we think about integration success and how you think about culture, the reasons that it's such a driver, I mean, number one, the most important is to retain and motivate talent. So as we think about generating excitement, you know, mergers are highly disruptive events for companies. And so as we think about retaining talent, the culture integration is key to that. I think it's also key to a smooth merger integration process, just clarifying, you know, ways of working for leadership. I did one cross-border integration with a U.S. company and a European company, and you know, as we started the merger integration planning, the people at the U.S. company were getting so frustrated because they wanted to have meetings with their counterparts in Europe. And the European company would say, well, we need to know what is the topic of the meeting? What are the objectives? Send over the agenda, the questions you want to ask, any data you want to have, you know, who needs to be in the meeting. And so the American company wanted to just kind of go, just get on the phone and start discussing things. The culture of the European company was that you didn't do that. You You set out agendas, you were very disciplined. And it was partially because in the European company, their goal and their behavior was not to waste time. And so their way of ensuring that a meeting was efficient, successful, et cetera, was to have all these things in advance, have the materials in advance. It was very important to them. And so just in the merger integration process, it kind of set up this clash where the two companies just didn't understand. They were getting frustrated with each other without kind of understanding that why the company was behaving this way, why it was important to their culture. And so having that kind of culture integration is just important to facilitate the integration process overall and get people working together. Avoiding the implementation roadblocks. So really thinking about and Ram, this is what I was talking about on the synergy side is, if you haven't kind of resolved some of these culture issues or addressed them, just implementing the new initiatives, achieving those synergies is going to be quite hard because you're not going to get people to work together. And then finally, just establishing the foundation for the long term, assuming you get through all these with a healthy company intact, having that culture for the long term, kind of establishing that, aligning it with the strategy is really important. And so as we think about the pain points, I've talked through some of these, but on the left-hand side here, you'll recognize that the two sides of the behaviors that I talked about, the purpose and values, and then the enablers. Maybe I'll just highlight a few here that I've seen, but this purpose, this is a little bit about what we saw in terms of performance versus inspiration. Mission-driven company is a company that leads with inspiration. Their employees are rallying around a goal, that versus financially driven, which is performance. Performance is what matters. The strength of the identity is very interesting. When I worked on the merger of United Airlines and Continental Airlines, and Continental had an employee base that was had a much higher tenure than United did. There had been a lot of turnover at United and the leadership team. The employees were anywhere from 0 to 5 years. The majority of the employees, whereas at Continental, you're looking at 15 to 20. And so the strength of the identity in that case was actually very, very strong at Continental, where you had people who had been there forever and ever, versus at United, where you had, really more, people who believed in the kind of purpose and the values of United, but they just hadn't been there as long. And so the strength of the identity, how embedded it is, can be very different across the companies as well, and cause a pain point. On the enabler side, just to hit on one here, decision making. This is always a pain point. I don't think I've ever seen two companies that make decisions in entirely the same way, and it's such a frustrating process when you're trying to work with a company that doesn't make decisions in the same way as you do. So this can be anything from directive versus consensus, rapid decision making versus thorough discussion. Companies that like to see all the data, the analytics, bring that all to bear, versus companies that like to just make pretty rapid decisions. They say, let's go. If we fail, we'll rapidly kind of redirect, and that's how they make decisions. This can be a huge pain point for companies as they go through this. On the bottom side, the communication I sort of mentioned. This can also be a huge pain point in an integration setting. Companies that are more in-person versus virtual, those that like the town halls and the get-togethers and things like that. Formal versus informal. Does the CEO, have an intranet site where they're pretty informal and they talk about what's going on, or does everything come through sort of very formal communication? Just another one that's not on here is just how frequently they communicate, how much they do. This can be a huge pain point, especially in an integration context. And so as we think about sort of what you do, how you move forward, what do we typically do with companies in an integration setting? The first thing that we do is to kind of articulate the future state. And we do this, this is, someone asked about how we understand the cultures. So we would do something like this after you've done that diagnostic that I talked about, after you've tried to really get under the differences in the two cultures, really understand them. We would do something like a workshop or a series of workshops where we actually try and align the new leadership team on what their vision for the culture is, how they think about the purpose. I've actually even taken companies through the development of a new purpose and values. And so really kind of articulating what are our objectives, how are we kind of going to align this new company, what are we aiming for? And so we have, a few examples here on the right-hand side of, what a purpose statement can look like and what some of the values are that might go along with that. So that's how we start. And then we try and define with the company's specific tangible behaviors. So again, bringing it back to behaviors that reinforce the culture and the ways of working. So we say, what are the desires, behaviors, and outcome that are consistent with our purpose? And actually write these down. And how do we communicate those out to employees? How do we ensure that our leadership team is living those behaviors and reinforcing them? So we try and articulate that and really define that so that people understand, if you just, again, as I said, if you just have the things on this page and they're not connected to the behaviors in the organization, you're not going to truly be living the culture. And so you have to translate. It's not enough. It's not sufficient with a new company to just, write these words on a page. You really have to translate it down into behaviors and how you're incenting those behaviors, how you're tracking those behaviors, how you're living those behaviors as a leadership team. The other thing we talk about is moments of truth. So what are these highly visible moments where we can demonstrate our values and beliefs? These can come in an integration setting, how you treat employees through the organizational design and talent selection process, how you think about, your celebrations when the two companies come together, what that looks like, where the leadership team is. Those sort of highly symbolic moments of truth are very important and need to be consistent with the culture in order to truly drive it and make sure that employees are going to live it every day as well. There's also those day-to-day routine interactions over time that we talk about. Any interaction with your leader, any way that you're sort of allowed to make decisions as a frontline staff member. Those little moments of truth over the day-to-day will have a huge impact. And so we work with companies to think about how to translate the purpose and values that you've created into the behaviors themselves.
Alex, at this point, panel discussion, absolutely the right point, actually. The number of questions are really, and I'm sure you'll address it with the panel, how can coaching help?
Yeah.
Some of the questions are, if there's a coach who is appointed by the acquiring company, people in the acquired company, are they likely to not trust that person? And if you take the leadership of the two, is that something like in a marriage counseling, is that something would help, and so on and so forth? There are multiple questions. Many of them are opinions rather than questions, but so those are some of the things that you might like to address as well. And after that, sometime in between, I really would like to very briefly address this particular. There are two people here in the audience, both of them my vintage, which makes us ancient, Prem Kamath and Richard Saldana. Both of them were my colleagues in Levers long time ago. And we all three were involved very deeply in a very, very major merger and acquisition between Unilever at that point in time in India, as well as a company called Lipton, which then later was integrated into this. So lots of lessons we learned. And one of the things was that if we had any knowledge about coaching, probably the senior leadership, if they had been coached properly, maybe things would have been done differently. But anyway, I'll let you carry on with your panel at this point in time.
Yeah, and certainly we will we can address, let's move to the panel, because I think through the panel discussion, we'll address a lot of these questions about how coaching can help. I agree with you, had, in many cases, I think had people understood some of the lessons that you can impart through coaching, some of these culture issues, in my experience, might not have been as severe as I've seen, certainly in the past. I'm going to stop sharing the presentation now. So great. Let me open it up to the panel, maybe to start with, and Anita, maybe I can start with you and ask you to talk a little bit about your own M&A experience. I know you've been through this firsthand, and how the culture aspect influence. I know a situation where a much smaller company sort of been acquired by a bigger company, but maybe you can talk through a bit about your firsthand experience there.
Sure. So been on both sides. So the first one that I recollect was when I was part of a large organization and we were acquiring small organizations. I don't think that we went through the whole exercise of HR heads looking at the value, collaboration, etc. It was just a glossed over thing. Yeah, it looks okay, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But more of it was a business really that was driving it. We clearly knew that we needed to learn from the other smaller organization, because that was clearly a space that had that was not known to the large company that we were in. But one of the things that Priya in the audience had talked about was identity. So we were very clear that we needed to preserve the identity of the leaders that came through the acquisition, because that world was not known to us. So it was a true diversification to a new market. So with that, what happened was that we created a separate business line, gave them full autonomy to run it as if they were running their company from outside, just that they were integrated. So there was no pressure to become like the large company. So it really helped. It helped retain it, but I don't think that the cultures really integrated really well. It just continued to be an island, so I don't think the bestest thing happened, just that they continued in. I'm going to talk over to the other one where it was a small company, a startup company that was absorbed into this large, huge 80,000 worldwide employee base. So really brutal. The small company was obviously just about 200 people. Again, what the value that they were bringing in was substantially different to what the large organization was. But here is where what is in it for me, for every employee of the startup, was not considered. So what really ended up happening is that the structure became, I think as how I think Arcela or somebody said, was the large company gobbling up somebody that's a startup small company, and the identity not preserved. So for everybody in the small organization, it was, what's going to happen to me? So when there's uncertainty that MG talked about, that is when none of that coaching or anything else would have worked, except for, it was realized soon that the managers had to step up and play the leadership role of being a coach to their teams, to say, look, it's okay, this will happen. And for the other side also, to go through the process of, and I love that process, which was, I know Ram would love to talk about that, which is ADKAR, change management, which is really about, I'm just going to type that in, change management via awareness. Does everybody in the organization know as to why is this happening? Why is this change really required? Why is the acquisition happening in the first place? D is the desire, which is, do I know what will be the benefit to me? Am I therefore desirous of a change? Because I see something will happen for me as an employee in this large organization that I'm now merged with. The K is the knowledge. Do I know how to change? Often the small organization, for example, being picked up by the large one, was a highly matrixed organization. So imagine a culture shift where all decisions were being taken by the small organization in their own high speed, highly autonomous, agile. And then it was merged with this large French European company that was all about, why do we need to do this, documented, et cetera, and a matrix one. So nobody knew as to who's really accountable for the whole thing. Do I take the decision? Do I have to go to somebody else? So the whole desire and the knowledge of how to change was just not being addressed. And hence the ability of some of the leaders from the small startup were questioned to be, this person is a pessimist or is not conforming to the requirements of behaviors of a large organization. And hence a lot of leadership moved on. A total failure because the personal change was not looked at, while the business change is all set up properly. You know, we'll have so many boxes filled up, etc. This is a good system and process, but a total failure. The reinforcement, of course, in the model, just to complete that, is the values and behaviors are just not the plastic laminate on the walls, right? They have to be reinforced via success stories or people sharing their war stories, others appreciating in terms of how have they integrated from either side. And that kind of makes it a fun part of being integrated either way. But I've seen both sides really, and it's always just sad to see as to how some of them will fail because due person related change has not been factored in.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, I mean, I have also seen that, and you know, in these settings, really employees go to, what does it mean for me, right? And that's natural. Everybody does that, and so it's important to think through the change management and think through how you're inspiring the people, how you're painting that vision for them, because if you don't do that, as you say, you know, that was why I highlighted that first thing was retention. You know, if you don't do that, you're gonna lose people. Mohan, maybe you can talk about, not in an integration setting, but as you think about, actually, and this is another thing for, as you think about coaches and coaching your executives, often, you know, people make job changes and people go to a new organization and have to now navigate a new culture, really understand and navigate a new culture. And so maybe Mohan, you could speak a little bit to that and how you think about, as a person kind of entering an organization for a first time, how do you start to understand the culture and how do you behave within it? I think would be quite relevant for folks. Oops, Mohan, do we have you, or you have a?
Yeah, muted, Mohan.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for that. Yeah. So I was saying the experience that comes to mind is about 20 years ago when I joined a global MNC, and about 20 years ago, joining an MNC for an Indian was, in a manner of speaking, you know, a good upward mobile job change. That was a cultural shock for me because that organization had a matrix structure. I was an alma mater of an Indian organization with Indian cultural values. And when I moved into a global European matrix organization, it brought its own kind of challenges. When I reflect on that incident, for me, the greatest struggle was understanding that there is a country organization and there is another person whom I report to who is sitting at the headquarters in Europe. So who is it that I turn to for support, and who is it who is my customer? It dawned on me after nearly about 6 months of struggle and speaking to various people that the country person is the guy who is responsible for the business of the country. So I am in service to the head of the country. That is, he is my customer for the services I can provide. And that person who is head of my vertical sitting in Europe is the person I turn to for support. So this confusion, it kind of cost me pretty dearly in the early stages. When I was turning to my customer for support, who was a country head for support, and he says, look, I don't know. You have to figure this out on your own. So it took a little while for me to come to grips with that. And because it was a new organization in India, there was a lot of European import in terms of people, and they brought in they just behaved as if this is Europe all over again. And the Indians are meant to support what we want to do as Europeans in bringing that business into the country, in doing the work that needs to be done. So there was a kind of a stepmotherly treatment towards Indians over there. It took a little while for me to understand that, and it pained a little bit. There was a lot of pain in that relationship which I had with the organization. I don't know if coaching could have helped or not, but one aspect which subsequently made itself apparent to me is I think someone brought it up in the chat, is about national cultures, or at least on Eastern culture and European Western culture kind of thing. And now think back to those 7 cross-cultural factors. There is one factor which is called power distance. What is the distance which exists between an employee and his boss? In Indian cultures, typically, if I do not agree with my boss, I am likely to remain silent until the boss comes up and asks me, "Hey, what's wrong, Mohan?" So I tended to remain silent. Whereas in a European Western culture, if I don't agree with the decision that is being made, I can walk up to my boss. In fact, the boss expects me to walk up to him and says, "Look, I have a problem. Can you explain this to me? I don't understand this." It took me a while for, on much reflection, after I quit the organization, that I realized that this was some aspect of the culture which I was not aware of. And I did not recognize or acknowledge that this is a fundamental difference in a culture between two different parts of the two different parts of the world itself. So that's what I wanted to share. I think the cross-cultural factors have a big role to play in any global M&A and should be given some consideration and understanding.
Alex, are you still there? Or we lost you? Hello? Okay, I'll jump in while I think maybe Alex is having a bit of a problem with her bandwidth. I'm truly glad, Anita, you referred to the ATCAR, and Mohan, you referred to the 7-step model, Hofstede. In fact, von Strompener's last week, when he spoke about his model of culture, he sort of based, his own model is also very famous, some parts of it. Yes, personally, I have gone through multiple mergers and acquisitions. And as I said, there are 2 of my great colleagues from way past. We worked in Unilever with assimilation at that time of Lipton. And later, after I left, they worked with Brook Bonds and so on. Both of them have had tremendous years of experience. And in my personal capacity later, when I went on to my own path elsewhere, I worked with 12 different joint ventures across the world. Many of them, if not, they were typical mergers and acquisitions. They were actually a cultural integration of different mindsets in many ways. Now, in any of these models, you might think that Korea and the United States are in 2 parts of the world, very different, the Oriental culture and Western culture. In fact, I found many things very, very similar. I'm not quite in agreement with what Mohan says. In a Western culture, you can walk up to your boss. You don't, believe you me. I worked with several number of American companies where my way is highway is the way that the boss approaches a problem. Whereas embedded in the culture of teamwork and dispersion is strangely, ironically, is a Japanese system, the Ringi system, where decisions are taken collectively. In fact, there's a very famous book, Lean Thinking, and which was a sequel of A Machine That Changed the World. The authors talk about, I still remember vividly, I was in the automotive industry at that point in time. He said, we went to the General Motors plant in Detroit, the biggest plant, and we went to the biggest plant of Toyota in Japan. In General Motors, the factory manager and the hierarchy, they were in charge of everything. All decisions had to be taken, including if there was a problem where the line had to be shut. In Toyota, the operator on the line had the power to switch off if there was a problem. In Toyota, the line never ran for more than half an hour at a time. It stopped, whereas in Toyota, the line never stopped. And it changed, believe you me. I was in that business for about 10 years, and it changed the way that American companies operated. Even today, they have a lot to catch up, but the entire culture of the American automotive companies, starting from the biggest, started changing when they realized what the Japanese did to them. And that was essentially because of a completely different approach to how they came across this problem. So the power distance equation, I completely agree with you. It's extraordinarily important. The power distance equation essentially means the hierarchy, and which then becomes individualistic and collective differences, female and male expressions in terms of how power is expressed and so on and so forth. A classic example, if they want to contribute, I can invite Prem and Dicky into this conversation. When I worked with the merger or acquisition of Levers and Lipton's, Lipton was a very hierarchical culture. Levers, the power distance equation was much lower. I mean, you couldn't walk up to your boss and tell him what you thought of him, you would get sacked. But the approachability was much easier, whereas in Lipton, it was a much more hierarchical. It came from, let's say, the tea garden philosophy, almost colonial in a sense. So one of the things I vividly remember is that the chairman who took over from Levers, the merger, and he said, you know, today I'm going to announce to you this. In Lipton, we have 5 different dining halls. And starting from the board, and then for senior managers, and then junior managers, and so on and so forth. Whereas in Levers, we just have 1, which was not quite true because there was 1 for non-managers, but all managers ate in one place. So, and he went on to say, at the board level dining hall, these guys, you know, they have pretty much access to a cellar. They can have the wine, the beer, the gin and tonic, or whatever else it wants. That's what they have. And they have a yacht, which is parked in the River Hooghly for them to use. All that is over as of today. Gone. And then there'll be 1 dining hall and so on and so forth. So it was a complete decimation of what people were used to. The power distance equation was completely changed. Now, you would have thought that people would have been tremendously happy in Lipton's for this to happen, but it really changed the way of life. And I don't think they were immediately very happy. It took a long time for them to get used to this difference in culture. And also, I think in all, this is something Alex can answer. In pretty much all acquisitions that I have seen, or mergers, the one who's more powerful, who calls the shots, rarely is an acquisition between equals. And I'm not very sure that acquisition between equals works at all. Maybe it won't work. It's usually between a bigger and a smaller fish. And very often there is a take no prisoners attitude, the winner takes all attitude. And ultimately, the culture of the larger company prevails over the culture of the acquired company, however better it may be. I mean, to go to an unlikely example, if this AIBF, whatever, IBF or whatever, takes over the Zappos, it's very likely the Zappos culture would get decimated, and irrespective of how much better it is. So I just want to leave that thought. Yes, in terms of coaching, today I do work with some companies, not really. The thing you need to realize is something like ADKAR model. It's fantastic. It's a great model. It's a very, very good coaching model. It starts with awareness, motivation in terms of the desire to assimilate one with another, and then 3 aspects of the knowledge, the ability, and the reinforcements, as it were, the anchoring from the awareness that needs to happen, action, and all that, which is pretty much a training that is done across the company. Alex referred to it in a kind of work, but Bain does. Basically, it's a lot of training done at various levels. But if you start with the top management to the bottom, there's a lot of work involved. The larger the company, the greater the amount of work. There's a lot of cost involved. So I don't know whether many companies really budget that cost of the training, the investment that they need into this. And the simple answer to me is they don't. And therefore, there's very little, there's a superficial kind of a thing which is done. Okay, I'll do some surveys, something, spot surveys, get it done and all that. And then they lead to a lot of the other ills that we see. And somebody asked, how many of them, if the misalignment happens, do they survive? I think in many cases they do, because the big fish eats a small fish. And so pretty much everybody who's in disagreement, they leave. That's all that happens. And that's what I have seen happen in several such cases that I have personally experienced. So I'll stop here and give it back to you, Alex, and Anita and Mohan to continue the conversation.
Great, thanks, Ram. And apologies, I was I got kicked out for a minute, but I'm back on now, so hopefully you can hear me okay. So some questions here about how exactly the coaching of major influences in M&A was actually done. Honestly, I think Ram just hit on it, which is I think this is an opportunity. You know, I have not seen coaches specifically brought in an M&A context. What I think the opportunity is for you all is, whether you're coaching your execs individually or whether you have relationship with a company, to try and carry the message of how important this is in an M&A setting. And frankly, as you think about culture more broadly, some of the experiences that Mohan talked about in terms of, you know, really being part of a company for the first time, making that job switch, all of those are sort of merger-like scenarios where you can be talking to your folks about the situation, about how important it is, how you have to think about culture, how these behaviors, you know, aren't always readily identifiable. And so I think for all of us, we would say this is an opportunity for you as coaches to think about how to kind of address it in the M&A scenario in particular. I don't know, Anita, Mohan, if you have anything to add on that point. Anita, maybe if you want to add to that.
Sure. I'm going to take a little detour, not to talk about organization stuff, but I just wanted to highlight that, especially in the Indian culture, when a girl marries into the boy's family, so-called, it's like a merger, right? I wouldn't call it an acquisition, no pun intended there, but merger, right? So what really needs to happen, and what happened to me also, and this was a marriage across states, so you can imagine the two cultures to be very different. What I see as a similarity is that if you have a partner along with you, in this case my husband, who pretty much was listening actively, now I can relate to it via coaching vocabulary, but if you have your so-called peers at work or in the family situation, your husband, somebody who is step-locked with you as you go through the experiences of how the two cultures are so different, and is recognizing the need that when I stepped into the new family, I was aware that I needed to integrate. I had a desire to integrate. So the ADKAR model perfectly fitted in. I didn't know how to change, right? I didn't know how to really let go of certain things that I held so dearly in my culture, in my previous conditioning. I don't think I had the full ability in all circumstances to change, but as I kind of dropped some balls here, there, etc. But you know, if my husband was not to be there with me as a coach or as a mentor / friend, it would be quite difficult. So the way that I would see that role that somebody in the family plays, so as to be able to allow for the new person in the family to adjust, and other way around. I think that if the managers in organizations are more coach-like, they can sense when their team members are uncomfortable in that M&A situation, much like they themselves would be, but somebody needs to hold the fort. So I think that particular coaching behavior in managers is really what should be promoted, rather than assuming that the company will invest a lot into external coaches, etc., during the M&A, because as Ram said, they don't, right? And as I think, as Alex, you're also saying that it just is something that you just have to keep going with in the M&A scenario. So I just thought I'll bring that personal thing too into this, because I think that's always there, the change management in life.
Anita, before Mohan steps in, I just want to say one thing. I've asked whether Prem and Dicky would like to join us in the panel. If they do, we'll get them in here. There are a lot of people that I meet, coaches, and I'm very envious of them. They say they coach as CEOs. I rarely coach CEOs because no CEO that I know wants to be coached. They want other people to be coached. They would like to change other people's behavior. But the CEO himself or herself, they believe that they don't need any change whatsoever, very, very rarely. So if someone asks me a question, like Prem has asked, and how do you coach these influencers? Rarely ever do you have influencers who even want to be coached. They don't want to change because they know all that there is to know. They are the gods on earth. And this is really where the problem is. And so if any of you have any solutions, then you can come and speak that aloud. So like Prem says, I don't want to join because this is a topic and I wanted to learn from it. Honestly, I mean, there are only questions, there are no answers. We all know that coaching can help. And if there are any people here who are likely to become CEOs, I do work with some CEOs, to be honest. And yes, they are amenable to listening. And some of them are in the process of mergers and acquisitions. It's a long drawn process. It all depends on, the situation, the context, and much they may want to do some things which they think are the right things to do. Very often the situation may demand they do something else. And whether because of the legal restrictions or various other kind of stuff. So it's extremely complicated. I don't think there is any one solution to any of this. Sorry, Mohan, I'll pass it on to you. There's some other stuff coming up on the chat. Maybe you guys would.
I guess one add to that, and then we'll go to Mohan. Ram, is from a CEO perspective, that's probably true. I think that culture influences and navigating the culture of an organization influences everyone in the organization. And so, no matter if it's not the CEO, but it's someone else within an organization that you're coaching or trying to think about, you can see it from both sides. One is coaching the leaders within the organization, whether in an integration context or not, honestly, to think about how they're reinforcing the behaviors of the culture, how they're approaching that. If they're in an integration context, how they're showing up, how they're talking to the company, what their sort of methods are. I think their openness to change, their openness to understanding. And if you're coaching someone who's going through an acquisition themselves, helping them navigate or job change for themselves, helping them navigate understanding the culture. Some of the things that Mohan talked about. How do I, that was a great example because that's not written down anywhere. That's not in the values, how you operate within a matrix organization and who you go to and who's responsible for the decision. That's not going to be written down anywhere. That's understanding the behaviors of the organization. And so I think some of the in my mind, the way that coaches can help is through that navigation and understanding that. Mohan, welcome to comment on any of those, but I also just want to make sure we get your opinion on learning and development in particular, and how the approach to that, not necessarily in an M&A setting, but just in general, reinforces the culture of the organization or shapes the culture of the organization, or can help this community as coaches in terms of helping their executives in this context.
So, Alex, perhaps I won't address your question because it bears a lot of thinking. But since behavior is ultimately a in your model, it's a manifestation of certain values that we all hold dear. Am I audible to you?
Yeah, I think your
Okay.
bandwidth is a little low, Mohan. You might like to switch off the video. Your voice is wavering.
Let me do that. Okay. So if it's better now, what I wish to say was, over the years, I've tended to discount the kind of values which are there in PowerPoint presentations or posters hung on the walls. What I find far more useful to talk about, or even to help develop, are what the term I've coined for myself is work values, which means values which gets manifested in actual interactions in day-to-day work. So for example, the kind of words that I like to deal with, or the kind of questions I ask them is, do people listen to each other in meetings? Do people own up to, somebody saying, okay, I goofed up their hand and say, I goofed up? Okay, do they take ownership? Those are work values which are far more meaningful in trying to understand how do we work together than any of those values of, let's say, meritocracy, or those big sounding speculative words which one sees on the walls. So when you look at those kind of very fun core working together behaviors, they can form a far more common substrate to a culture than anything which is touted by organization is saying that these are our values. So that's the primary thing that I would like to add from my point of view. However, these are early thoughts, and I would love to hear or be coached on this from either Anita or Ram.
Anita or Ram, Ram, go ahead. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of questions. I think Prem asked again a question. Has Alex coached anybody? You are not a coach, so probably, well, we have talked about coaching. The classical methodology of coaching is not what Bain does. I know that we have discussed that. And as you said, you haven't really been in a situation where you coach that. I just want to address a couple of questions on Dr. Vafi has asked a couple of interesting questions. One is that, one of the things that we need to understand is, early in my life, the person who was almost like a CEO, who later took over as a CEO, said, look, this seat is like a chair with two legs. It's very unstable. And so it doesn't even have three. Certainly it doesn't have four. And you need to get used to it, if ever you get to it. And when I became a CEO and the CEO of CEOs, I realized how correct he was. You are living in a space of total uncertainty. You are in a state of total not knowing. Yes, if you understand how coaching works, or if you're working with a coach, certainly that will help. Whether you have the ability to realize that, or whether you want to do that. And someone asked, yeah, the greatest leaders that I have met have a great amount of humility. That is very true. That is what the book by Jim Collins is about, Good to Great. They're the greatest leaders who have contributed the maximum amount of shareholder value. Public doesn't even know them. But they have done tremendous jobs, and they have added enormous amount of value. One person, certainly I can talk about, for instance, Paulson, who was the Unilever chairman for several years, who recently demitted. Amazing. The kind of changes that he brought about in that huge behemoth was unbelievable. And there are people in India, for instance, Anand Mahindra, for example, who truly exhibit that spirit of humility. There are quite a few others. That is very true. But at the end of the day, I think they also are dictated by a certain structure. They are dictated by a certain system and certain set of responsibilities. And for them to take the risk of moving beyond that, they may have to look at various other factors. Coaching can help. But how many of them are willing to, for whatever reason, is a different question. Anita?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I wrote in the chat too that I haven't really seen the investment in the coaching being done, and I don't see the difference between the small, medium, and large size organizations to be any different. In fact, the small organizations, I find coaching the CEOs or the founders to be extremely difficult because they would not really want to be coached. They definitely, and that's why I guess the VC sets that I find it a little bit harder to coach the founders of small companies. The medium to large size, once the new organization settles in, that's when the gaps are found with how the new organization, the acquiring company, would want the leaders to be, and hence coaching opportunities. That's where I'm involved with after the M&A has settled in with people in places. And then it's no different from any other coaching assignment that we do in a settled organization, really. But I do wish that coaching is seen to be a key initiative while the M&A is going on, or even thought of as an investment when the M&A happens, because the costs are high, but it would help in successful M&As because you're dealing with the people aspect in addition to the business aspect of the acquisition. Alex, you want to add that?
Great. Sorry?
Do you want to add
Yeah.
something there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything that's being said. I think it's certainly an opportunity. I know, Ram, I know we're coming up on time here. I don't know if there's, if I can just offer maybe a few thoughts, and Anita, Ram, Mohan, if you have anything else. But
No,
I think
Alex, I think you should close. Yeah, we are pretty close to the
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining. I hope it's been helpful. I think my main message to everyone is to and you know this as the community of coaches, but you have an important role in imparting the message to everyone else about how important culture is to the organization in general, in just steady course of business, but even more so in an M&A setting, and how important it is to think about culture and not ignore it, and to do our best to coach the leaders through it, whether that's through formal coaching, or through mechanisms that we can use for your executives who you're talking to. Doesn't have to be CEO level, and how to help them navigate through a situation, whether it's integration or making a job change or struggling with something. What I found is that executives often, when they're struggling within the organization, or haven't gotten the promotion they want, or haven't been able to achieve the outcome that they wanted, it can often have to do with a misalignment between what they think the behaviors and the culture of the organization is, and what it truly is, and what's rewarded. And so I'll leave you with that thought. I appreciate you all joining. I hope it's been helpful. And to my panelists, Anita, Mohan, thank you so much. And of course to Ram, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alex. I think there was a comment from Francois asking me, is there an evidence to support whatever you said? I don't know. As far as the panelists are concerned, I think we are speaking from our experience. That's about all the evidence. So if you want academic papers, I'm not quite sure. Bain does have a lot, but I don't think there's not much about coaching in terms of M&A and how it has helped or not helped or whatever. But I want to go back to something that Anita said as I close, is that she said it's like a marriage. Yes, any merger, any acquisition ultimately would be a marriage. It's not a kind of a colonization. It's not a country taking over others, as in the early stages happened with all these colonizing countries taking over and then by power overruling them. It doesn't work in today's context. So like in a marriage, it's always a compromise. There is no zero sum that is going to happen. There is going to be a win-win, which means that somebody has to lose something, somebody wins something, and both of them come to an understanding. That's ultimately, that is what can perhaps be provided by a good coach. In some senses, some of you may have attended the session on mediation, for example, which was conducted. That's what brings to my mind. There are two parties involved, and you're not really coaching just one person. You are really working with both of them, and you are trying to find out what is that best interest that they both have. It's like an interest-based mediation, interest-based negotiation, finally coming together without confronting, but being collaborative. If that resonates for you, that's fine. If it doesn't, I don't have anything more to add. I don't think you have anything much more to add. We can leave you with questions, not certainly with answers. So thank you all for joining us. We have one last session in this whole colloquium tomorrow. That's Peter Hawkins is coming here, the guru of systemic coaching. And fittingly, he is going to close the session. Magda Mok opened the session, so please do come. And Peter is most likely, he has asked us whether we would be willing to host him for a 3-day workshop in India next year. We would be delighted to, so we'll probably offer that as well. And as of today, thank you very much, Alex. Thanks for being here and sharing your experiential wisdom on mergers and acquisition. I think the presentation was fantastic. If it is possible to share that, if it's not protected by IP, then we can pass it on to the audience and putting it on the forum. Let me know. And thank you, Mohan. Thank you, Anita, for joining us. Wonderful. Guys, please come onto the forum and post your questions, and we'll try and get it answered as best as possible by the panelists. I would invite Alex to the forum to answer that as well. Go to the YouTube, subscribe to it, and also the Coacharya LinkedIn page where we plan to disseminate, and we want to use that as a communication medium. Thank you all very, very much. Good night to all of you, and whatever time you are in. Bye. Thank you. Bye, Alex. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Alex.
Bye. Thank you.